Hi, welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today on the show we're talking to Luke Pollard, who runs a YouTube channel called the Cogito. It's all about philosophy based on life, essentially. He does videos about Game of Thrones, about Rick and Morty. We had a really interesting conversation about, the extremes in politics, about mass incarceration, mass surveillance, about Rick and Morty, Game of Thrones, and just the nature of life and reality in general. If you haven't yet seen Game of Thrones Season 7, I would suggest you skip the last 20 minutes. There is a couple of spoilers. So before we start, just a quick plug. Today's episode is sponsored by Beer 52. They're the UK's largest craft beer club, and you get a monthly selection of craft beers from around the world along with a copy of their magazine. It's a collection of expert-selected small batch beers that get delivered directly to your door. And if you want £10 off your first order, you can follow the link in the description and get a nice cheap set of beers for you and your friends. If you enjoy the show, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter. You can share the show with your friends and, generally tell the world about us. So let's get on with it. Here's the interview. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks.
Lovely to have you on.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
I've wanted to have a philosopher on since we first started. My girlfriend actually is a philosophy student, so I get to hear that one side of what's going on with what she's learning in philosophy, and half of it I find absolutely fascinating, and half of it I'm struggling to understand what they're teaching.
It's a broad church philosophy.
Yeah, the one that really got me is what makes a chair a chair. That was the sort of concept that she was discussing that one day that it was taking me so long to get my head around, and I was like, is it really worth all this effort to understand what makes a chair a chair?
I spent a long time in that side of philosophy. And I came to the realization before starting the YouTube video, if the person you're talking to asks those questions, then it probably isn't worth talking about. You need to focus on things that actually matter to people in the world. So I've slowly slipped into the kind of existentialist side of things, how to be and how to deal with freedom and so on.
Oh, well, everyone loves a bit of existentialism, even if they don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
But yeah, your YouTube channel is really fascinating. Do you want to talk a little bit about the reason you started it and sort of idea behind it?
Sure. Yeah. The reason is really two-pronged. I couldn't see anything like that on YouTube at the moment, and my daughter's just started primary school, so she's 5 years old, and she's going to go through her whole education, being taught about maths and English and so on, and never really encountering the big ideas until she chooses to study them at university, and you can't choose everything. So I wanted to kind of give her an education in the interesting things that I think can help you live a better life. That's why we do philosophy. That's why we do psychology. And I'm branching into art history now as well, because I think those can inform you and actually give you a richer life later on. So that's the main reason I'm doing it. I suppose the slightly more personal reason is I'm a full-time single dad. So I have Evelyn all of the time, but during the week I teach philosophy at a boarding school, so I'm working till she's gone to bed. So my parents do a lot of the care during the week, which means that I see her 1/3 of the year in the holidays all the time, and I see her all of the weekends. But during the week, it's really hard to kind of make contact with her. So this is my way of kind of spending any free time I have, I put into these videos to give her kind of a little extra something. Yeah.
Oh, it's a nice way of passing on some of your own knowledge that you sort of accrue, obviously, as from being a philosophy teacher, and I find it really fascinating just to watch people's take on the world, because a friend of mine whose interview actually we have coming up on the podcast, called Bill Duff, every single time I mention that my girlfriend studies philosophy, he tells this story about how he spent 2 days like giving lectures and sort of like watching other people give lectures on like negotiations, I think it was, and like army negotiation styles. And he said that they had a philosophy student or a philosophy professor, I forget which, but sat in the back for the entire time, and he was utterly astounded that just by watching for 2 days that they were able to completely sum up and grasp every single concept that they were trying to get their head around, and that he felt that philosophers had a quite unique way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me on to something you were talking about you did a video on mass surveillance. And about the idea that people behave identically whether they are physically being observed or whether they think they're being observed.
Okay, yeah.
And the idea that, now with social media, the Big Brother state, the amount of spying that the NSA and, the UK government and probably most governments do on their own citizens. I honestly wanted to know what extent you think people actually know that they're being observed in a lot of, because, there's obviously a lot of people who are very tech savvy and very aware of what's going on in the surveillance community and in technology and the ability that tech companies have to almost watch your every move, figure out everything you're searching for, understand everything that you want, think, and consume online. But I was curious to see to what extent you think people are aware of that and whether that plays into this idea that they act as if they're being observed. Because I'd say that most people online do not act like they're being observed.
I think maybe you spent too long on Reddit. I think actually it's hard to not know that you're being observed. Maybe you can get away with thinking that you're not being observed by the government. If you fail to read a newspaper or watch the news, then maybe you can think, oh no, I'm fine. I'm not a terrorist, therefore I'm not being observed. That's patently false. But I think when it comes to companies, it's impossible to not think you're being observed. Imagine that you're walking down the street and this guy follows you and just hands you some shoes and says, you were looking at these, would you like to buy these? And then a bit later he comes along and hands you a book that you've been looking at in the bookshop and says, would you like to buy this book? It's impossible to draw the conclusion that that guy has been stalking you. And it's the same when you go online. If you look at anything on Amazon or a clothes shop or whatever, you're going to see adverts for those things popping up again and again. You're being watched. The companies are stalking you. And I think it's very hard to see how companies can't have the same effect that government surveillance has. If we know that we're being watched by companies, then we moderate the way that we surf the web. And if we know that companies can do it, then we're probably going to draw the conclusion that governments are doing it too. They're just not coming up to you and saying, hey, I saw you went on this website. I think it's very, very hard to think that you're not being watched. So you are going to moderate your behavior. Well,
what extent do you think the kind of anonymity factor that comes with social media in general, like obviously, a lot of people just have their personal accounts on Twitter or they have their personal account on Facebook, but there's absolutely nothing to stop people just making spam accounts, troll accounts, and on Reddit it's completely anonymized. Obviously you can see a whole post history from someone on Reddit, but that doesn't give you any idea as to who they actually are. I struggle to see that people realize that once something goes out into the web that they're open to anyone seeing it. Like, because, okay, so for example, the conservative group Activate that just launched, they're like a young people's, they're like the antithesis to Momentum for the Tories, but they're not Momentum if you ask them. That's not what they're doing at all. So they came out and they put out this very antiquated meme on their Twitter, and they put up profiles of everyone that was involved on their website, and within hours, almost, they were getting, oh, this person, here's his Facebook profile, here's this picture of a yacht on his cover photo. I can't believe these rich people think that they can control blah, blah, blah. They, that sort of thing that people were just getting attacked for. And, maybe the things were a bit harsh because one of the kids was like 17 and like helping to set this all up. But
yeah,
they put all this information up online, and then as soon as people started scrutinizing, they immediately took it back. But once it's there, it's out. It's out.
Yeah.
There's no way, because people, especially in the political situation that we're in, things are just going to be latched upon, photographed, screenshotted.
Yeah.
Once it's out there, you can't do anything about it. And I think that almost proves to me anyway that people still don't understand this concept that once you're out there for criticism, and you're out there for scrutiny, and it's out there for everyone to see what you've done.
Yeah.
And I just struggle to kind of, maybe people do realize they're being watched and that everything's there, but they just don't care. Maybe we've kind of accepted that privacy is dead.
I think the types of behavior that are moderated are not necessarily the mainstream types of behavior. I think, especially in the south of England, it's not an embarrassing thing to say that you're a Tory. Well,
it shouldn't be.
Well, I don't know. But
okay, well, it shouldn't be an embarrassing thing to say that you support conservative ideas. Maybe it should be more embarrassing to suggest that you're cool with the shambles of our current government.
Sure. I don't think it should be actually embarrassing to say you support any political ideas. It's not the Tories that are going to moderate their behaviour. I think the fact that maybe they're kind of technologically unaware is it doesn't play into the bigger question of what about those political groups that aren't quite socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. And I'm not just talking about Islamic extremists here. I'm talking about anarchists or the extreme right wing. Now we may not identify. Sorry?
Or Antifa.
Indeed, we may not identify with these political views, mm-hmm. But that's where the moderation of behaviour starts. And the danger is that these views go underground, right? And they stop being expressed and challenged. And when you stop challenging a belief can become more powerful, not less powerful. And that's the real danger. This is what John Stuart Mill identified a long time ago in On Liberty, that if a view is wrong, it needs to be expressed, and then people need to show that it's wrong, and then everybody can learn that it's wrong. And if we think it's wrong, but actually it's right, then it also needs to be expressed, because we need to have the right views. That's what online surveillance does. It stops any discussion of extreme views. And then, of course, maybe what we term extreme changes, and your views or my views become extreme views. Mm-hmm. So that I think the Tories are always going to be the moderates in the middle. They don't need to moderate their behaviour. It's those who disagree with Tories or Labour. They're the ones that need to moderate their behaviour under this current system.
I don't know about moderate. I'd say maybe just be more open to ideas that aren't their own. Like it's kind of something I've been watching and a friend of mine is incredibly concerned about the way that a political viewpoint has become so associated with people's identity that you can't almost be friends with someone who's not agreeing with you 100% politically. Like there was a Guardian article that I just was shocked and appalled at that was entitled "Should You Be Friends with a Tory?" And it's like, yes. Like they might, they might be naive in some cases. They might be unaware of certain things that are happening, but you can't just attack someone for their belief and then not try and discuss it with them.
Yeah.
But
no, totally. We need to engage with the other side of the debate. I have friends that are Tories, friends that are Labour, and friends that are Green as well, and it's good to have that mix. I mean, every morning I read the Times on the right and the Guardian on the left, because if you don't engage with ideas that are different to your own or that you disagree with, then you're never going to grow and become better. You're just going to stagnate in your own little echo chamber.
Yeah. It's actually what you were talking about there with the idea that ideas go underground and aren't discussed and then kind of bubble back up to the surface is something that Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein were talking about on Joe Rogan's podcast. Actually, I think it was on Friday there. It's potentially one of the most interesting discussions I've heard in a long time. So if you have 3 hours spare in your life,
I'll have to look it up.
It's fantastic. We'll put it in the description, actually, if anyone wants to watch it. But they were essentially talking about the merits of free speech and the reasons for the kind of reemergence of very small strands of white nationalism in the US, and that in human history you get periods where the extremes like Nazism, rise up and rise up and rise up, and then they get quashed, and people for 50, 60, 70, 100 years, maybe more, don't think that it's possible for those ideas to, rise again, essentially, and sort of bubble up from I don't know, the corners of society and reestablish themselves. And people sort of dismiss that it's possible for these ideas to rise again, and then anyone that even suggests that that's happening is shut down, so you can't have a conversation about it. And anyone that's accused of it, of being, say, a white nationalist and isn't, feels that they're being unfairly persecuted, and then they kind of go underground, and then the ideas do fester and reemerge, like we've seen in Charlottesville. There unfortunately is still that type of thinking, and quite conceivably it never went away. It was just considered unacceptable until people were perhaps reinvigorated by even Trump potentially, but then it's a controversial statement to make. But
they've become legitimized themselves. If you look at 10 years ago, they're all skinheads, aren't they? And they look like thugs and they behave like thugs, and so no one will take them seriously. But now they dress in suits and have nice haircuts and speak eloquently, and suddenly it becomes acceptable to be an alt-right person.
The alt-right is a weird, like, what the news portrays as the alt-right isn't really the alt-right, in that there's like a very separate, there's the people who genuinely believe in like white nationalism and really extreme right-wing ideas, and that's the alt-right. And then there's the Kekistanis and the trolls who are just, it's just like an extreme form of humor to them, like with the Pepe memes and people just like, but for them it's just like provocative humor that they're espousing, like it's not meant to be taken seriously. And then when people do take it seriously, they suddenly believe that these people are absolutely nuts, when they're like, why are you taking my frog picture seriously? That's like
it's Hitler was dismissed as a joke, though, wasn't he? Right up until he started taking complete power over Germany. We take these things as jokes, and the Pepe thing may well have started as a joke, but it becomes adopted. These things are dangerous. I'm politics isn't really my area. I can talk about political philosophy with a little tiny bit of authority, but current politics or the history of politics is tricky. I do think Jordan B. Peterson is an expert on this, and has studied the rise of the Nazis for a long time. It is a worrying state of affairs. But I don't think the answer is to make these groups illegal, or and in Britain, if someone identifies with these kind of far right beliefs, social workers or teachers or whoever needs to recommend that they go and basically get some political deconversion therapy. The government will step in and take them away and persuade them that they're wrong. And
that's a dangerous path to tread down.
It's deeply troubling, isn't it? It's not the way to deal with political disagreement. You need to sit around a table and fight it out with words, not with violence, which is what all politics is. It's worrying.
Yeah, well, we personally had a little bit of pushback. Like, we're not a huge outlet, and we had a few people being like, "Why on earth would you give?" Because we have one of the leading members of Activate, that conservative group, coming on the podcast this week. And we got a little bit of pushback, even with our very tiny following, people being like, "Why would you want to give a platform to these people?" And it's like, I have no intention to give a platform to them. I want to point out inconsistencies. I want to question them on things I don't understand. I want to, give them a chance to explain the reasoning behind their ideologies and their ideas, and maybe I can get them to make a little bit of sense. I don't know, maybe that's being, too kind to my own abilities, but
no, it's the only thing to do. You need to engage with both sides, don't you? And you need to give them airtime. Completely.
Because I think, I don't know, the whole left-right thing is confusing as well, because obviously I'm not the typical person, no one is, but I find that I'm pretty happy for either more right-wing or left-wing solutions to a problem. Like, I'm happy to consider any side, as long as they're genuinely attempting to address issues that I see in the country.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there's personally what I think is one of the best ways to challenge to fight climate change is a proposal that was made by a US Republican. And it's essentially the idea that you would, instead of implementing a carbon tax or putting in loads of regulations, that you would completely wipe out all emissions regulations and replace it with an increasing year-on-year carbon dividend. So rather than the money going to the government coffers, essentially, that would be put into a universal payment for every citizen of the country. And in the same way that Alaska uses a dividend that's like an oil fund, so the oil companies pay, basically, I think The Simpsons said, to ravage the Alaskan natural landscape in the Simpsons movie, but they get paid a couple of $1,000 every year because of the drilling the oil companies are doing. So the people are maybe not 100% happy about the idea. Maybe they're fine with the idea, but they're all getting a financial incentive to sort of accept it, essentially. And while that's probably a bit short-sighted in that we maybe shouldn't be allowing drilling, it's the same principle in that, people might be slightly more supportive of a carbon tax if they were getting all the money from the tax.
Okay, so they get taxed for polluting the environment, and the money goes straight to the citizens. Yeah,
so it's just like a fund that gets paid into. So you'd have it starting as a small tax on carbon, and it would grow and grow and grow, but all the money would just go straight into a fund and then get paid to the population. So it would almost be like a universal basic income, but a very small one, obviously, given that you.
Yeah.
But it's that idea that then you let free market forces drive what comes next. You're not trying to artificially push people in one direction. You're just saying, you can't use this, go find something else. And that's the reason for wanting to remove the regulations, because then you're cutting costs for companies in that they're not having to comply with emissions regulations and that sort of thing. And while that's obviously not a good idea, companies are always going to find a way to get around regulations as much as they can.
Yeah.
What they can't get around is a big fat tax that is being applied to every piece of their business that's using energy. And that's a very hard thing to get around, and that hits their bottom line, and all of a sudden they're going, oh, okay, we actually need to find a better way to do things here.
Yeah. I don't know much about this at all, but the history of taxes and companies surely implies that they're very, very good at getting around tax.
Well, I agree, but essentially, I think we should, let it try and work, because even if they attempt to get around some of it, they're still being pushed in a direction where it's easier for them to just innovate in low carbon technology or, zero carbon technology than it is for them to continue to pay a way to get around the tax. But like, that would just be my opinion. We actually did a piece on it that you'll find. I'll put it in the description as well about the whole policy proposal. But yeah, so I feel that to go back to what we were talking about before, the whole left-right divide, I feel is kind of toxic in that you can't consider ideas from the other side without being labeled a sympathizer to, a communist, Marxist sympathizer, or like a fascist sympathizer.
Sure. And it's not just toxic, it's completely artificial. Because every country has a different conception of what's left and what's right. I remember when David Cameron was elected Prime Minister, Jon Stewart on The Daily Show lamented the fact that a Conservative had been elected Prime Minister of Great Britain. And I was sat there watching it thinking, he's more left-wing than any Democrat.
Nearly any Democrat, yeah.
Well, sure. There's Bernie Sanders and others, but our left-right divide is bizarre. We in Britain are significantly more socialist than a lot of other countries, not especially the United States. And what we call left-wing and what we call right-wing is something that's dependent upon cultural factors, nothing to do with actual political ideas themselves. So, I think it's always more useful to go back and actually read the political philosophers and start understanding what kind of view we take is based upon certain presuppositions. If you wanted to look at the left-wing stuff, you should start by reading Marx, start by reading the Communist Manifesto, and go, okay, so let's talk about the exploitation of the workers and alienation from our essential human nature and so on, and see whether we agree with those views and whether his economics, for instance, actually holds up. And I don't think it does, but
his basic point is kind of valid in terms of exploitation of workers, because the trade union movement's given us a lot of fantastic things in the UK. People can disagree with the unions, but they gave us sick pay, better working hours, better holidays, better, and whilst that has been put into law, it was that push from them in the first place. So I agree with you. There's always a merit to going and looking at even the fringe ideas and going, okay, what are they getting right here, and then what are they getting wrong, and how can I personally think that we can improve on this? What do I see as the pitfalls, and kind of making your way to a conclusion that way? It's so important to look at the actual theory and then look at the history of that as well, because when you talk about the pitfalls, if you apply Marxism wholeheartedly, you get nasty Soviet things going on. I don't know if that was applied wholeheartedly, but because I think it was more Lenin Marxism. In that he it was the dictatorship of the proletariat, but maybe Marx is just so idealistic in a way and kind of ignoring the very fundamentals of human nature and greed and.
A lot of people always say, right in theory, wrong in practice, right? But if it fails in practice, then there's something wrong with the theory. And I think there is a fundamental way in which the Marxist idea is set up, that it will always inevitably lead to dictatorship, and that is taking all property and giving it into the hands of the government. And you are always going to fail that. That is a dictatorship. I remember Engels wrote a letter to anarchists saying, look, when you have a proletarian revolution, you need a strong government in order to stop a bourgeois counter-revolution. That's it. It's done. As soon as you have a strong government that stops anything else from happening, you've sown the seeds for dictatorship. When that strong government has all of the money, all of the resources, and arms, you can't have any kind of freedom or democracy or anything along those lines. No liberal values. So I think Marxism inevitably leads to dictatorship.
Well, that's the evidence that we have so far.
Sure.
We haven't got anything counter to that, really. And your theory is pretty, I would say, pretty solid in that, as soon as you take away everything.
Yeah.
But that's, again, I think that's kind of, that extreme gets conflated with people who are trying to suggest more reasonable ways to redistribute wealth in that, so it happens with the right as well. So like if someone suggests, we need to increase tax on the rich a little bit because of the absolutely astounding levels of wealth inequality in the UK and even more so in America. Then people are like, oh, socialist, you want a socialist dictatorship, yada, yada, yada. Crazy Marxist, Yeah. And I think it's and like we were saying earlier, it's very quickly getting to a point where you can't suggest anything without being conflated with the most extreme versions of the ideals.
Well, it's a useful rhetorical trick, isn't it? To lump them all in together rather than addressing the individual idea. It's a form of a straw man fallacy, where you're just saying, no, I'm going to ignore what you're actually saying and say that you're really saying this, and then I'm going to attack the thing that I've set up. And you're right, it does happen in all political debates. And there's obviously a difference between socialism and communism. And it's the same for the right. I mean, you have the extreme kind of right-wing idea, like Nozick's idea that tax is theft. That if the government essentially says we're going to take money, otherwise if you refuse, we'll put you in prison, so threatening violence. And if you give us the money, we're going to decide how we spend it, not you. That's a mugging, is what that is. And I think that's quite an extreme right-wing idea.
But how did you get to your house to sit and think about this idea? Where you drove along a road. The whole idea that those very extreme kind of ideas always baffle me as well. The sort of very, very extreme libertarian idea that, tax is theft. This is my money. Get your hands off it. And be like, okay. Yeah. So what if someone else comes to try and take it? What are you going to do about it? Oh, I'll call the police. Oh. Who pays the police? You can have arguments to a very limited point where you go, okay, so what's the very least that you need in public services, and then you can talk about the very lowest tax rates you can get to accept that. But the idea that all taxation is theft is also hilarious when America was founded on the principle of no taxation without representation. It was built on the idea that yes, tax us as long as you give us a representative. And the idea that that's become sort of evolved into this tax is theft idea it makes me laugh quite a lot. And I do always wonder how they've managed to spin that. I think part of it is that they make tax so difficult to do in America. That people, and there's been loads of campaigns. There was one I was reading about quite recently that started in California that was basically a campaign to get all tax forms simplified, so that if you wanted and you're just employed by one person, you do your job there, that the IRS would send you a form of what they think you owe, and you would literally just sign it and send it back, and that would be it. And that it was campaigned against so heavily by Republicans who are anti all tax, and because they want tax to be the burden of people's lives. They want tax to be this thing that they hate having to do. And if it was just easy, and do it like that, people wouldn't get as mad about it, and people would probably be, fine with it to an extent.
It's because the poor and the middle class actually pay a considerable but not overly considerable amount of tax. So there needs to be some other reason why we hate paying tax, whereas the rich pay an enormous amount of tax. If they actually to find any loopholes. They would anyway. So there are good reasons why they hate tax. I mean, I would say on the policeman front, I mean, even Nozick argues for a kind of a night watchman state. So you do have very basic things paid for, like the police, just to keep the peace and to make sure that property isn't stolen, and if it is, then you rectify that. I would say that tax probably is theft, because it meets all the criteria, but that's fine. What's wrong with theft? One of our great English heroes is Robin Hood, who is essentially a taxman.
Stealing from the rich to give to
Steal from the rich and give to the poor.
He is John McDonnell.
Very good.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to see if anyone's made that meme.
Yes. Yeah. So with my YouTube videos, I've done a couple of political ones, but I tend to try to shy away from that, partly because of what you've said. It's such a high blood pressure kind of debate. Everyone is on the verge of a heart attack all of the time when anyone else is speaking. That it's impossible to think clearly about those issues. And I think I've realized also that the politics has a huge effect on our lives if the extremes get in. But as long as we're in a kind of a moderate political state, there are other things that influence our daily lives in a much more profound way. Things like friendship and love and beauty and meaning and finding a purpose in life. And so a lot of my videos have focused on that element of existence.
Everyone loves Amazon. You know, you can get everything there. I literally mean everything. And if you want to win a £500 Amazon gift card, or at least be entered for the chance, you can follow the link in the description and, you know, get yourself in for the opportunity to splash some cash on yourself, maybe your family, friends. So for your chance to win a £500 Amazon gift card, follow the link in the description. Well, maybe let's move on to that sort of side of what you do. We'll steer away from the politically charged ideas. What is it that you love so much about Rick and Morty? You've already done, is it 2 or 3 videos on them in your short time space?
I've done a trilogy, three videos on Rick and Morty. If I ever do a fourth, it'll have to be like the Douglas Adams trilogy of 4 parts. Yeah, I think Rick and Morty is a fantastic cartoon. It's the first one for a long time that's dealt, or maybe the first one ever that's dealt with these kind of core philosophical ideas. The big one, of course, being the question of the meaning of life. And Rick and Morty kind of attack it in an interesting way. They don't just say, "Oh, life is meaningless, therefore nihilism and black thoughts," but instead they start with the question of kind of creator and createe, so that they ask, is it so great if we were actually created? Does that make our lives better? I think Rick and Morty's answer is a big old no. That generally speaking, it makes our lives worse, because as soon as you've been given a specific purpose, you know, I have created you in order to to pass the butter, as Rick creates that little robot that his sole purpose is to pass butter. That's a really rubbish meaning for life, right? And if I were to tell you, Josh, that you've been created, I don't know, to only make podcasts, that's your purpose. If you do anything outside of that, then you're doing something that isn't the meaning in your life. You're probably going to react against that quite negatively. Whereas if you've chosen to make podcasts, you're choosing to accept that meaning, right? And the point is that no one can impose a meaning on your life that is satisfactory. It's only satisfactory if you choose it. And I think that is kind of the point with the created things in Rick and Morty. Each one of those things that discovers they're created reacts negatively against that. Like the universe that's created to power Rick's car battery. They're not sat around going, "Oh, this is great. At least I exist." Right? They're going, "This is horrible. Why am I sentenced to powering a bloody car battery? That's not something that I find fulfilling."
Oh.
Being created doesn't.
Just such a great episode.
It was a really good episode, wasn't it? Yeah, I tell you, in making these, I've watched each episode far too many times, because you need to find exactly the right clips in order to make it work. So you're just watching it again and again and again. Netflix must think I'm properly obsessed with Rick and Morty.
Well, that's fine. It's one of the smartest shows on TV right now. I'd say it's on par with South Park in my mind, but South Park has the edge in that the longevity that they've had. They're 20 seasons in, and I think their last season was one of the best. So
really,
they tackle a lot of sort of philosophical ideas, but they also tackle a lot of like cultural and societal problems and things that are going on in current events. So it's maybe less sort of philosophy of life based, but there is a lot of kind of nihilism in it as well. That, what does life matter? What does religion matter? What is they tackle a lot of things in a lot of very childish and yet brilliant ways, in the same way Rick and Morty does. So I think that's probably why I get so much out of both of them.
Yeah.
Rick and Morty, one thing that I really do love is the idea that life is absurd, and that once you realize that, you can have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you sit and try and consider the meaning of everything, you're gonna miss out on enjoying what it actually is.
Yeah.
And there's that part in the what do you call it? Not the promo, the first one, the pilot. That's it. In the pilot, where they're like running away from all the intergalactic government people who are chasing them, and then Morty like sneezes and this like thing comes out and like ages his entire life and then dies in about 3 seconds while it's running alongside him, and Rick's like, just don't even think, Morty, don't even think about it. Just like watch it, enjoy what the fuck has just happened, and then move on. Like don't go too deep into it.
Yeah. Not thinking about it is that is a big theme in Rick and Morty, isn't it? The intergalactic TV one as well, where Morty Summer realizes that she was a mistake, and Morty says we're all mistakes. Just don't think about it. Let's go and watch TV. It has some merit, doesn't it? Thinking too much about the meaning of life gets you down. I know that from very personal experience, that if you spend too long thinking about it, it gets to you. And I think this is kind of what the existentialists say, or some of the existentialists say. So Sartre says the meaninglessness of life essentially gives you freedom, which is a burden for Sartre. It's not perfect. But there's that phrase in his very famous lecture, Existentialism and Humanism, where he says, echoing the Heidegger and others, that existence precedes essence. And what he means by that is that you exist first and you define yourself afterwards. So you are you when you are born, and you come to understand who you are and the kind of life that you're going to lead as you grow up. And this is quite a revolutionary thought, because, of course, for most of human history, in philosophy, we've always thought that humanity has an essential core, that there is something that it is to be human. And this is a very Christian view. You see it in Aquinas, in Summa Theologica, for instance, where he believes that God has imbued all things with an essential meaning that we can uncover by looking at the purpose or the thing that they produce. This is what he calls natural law, and that's quite a permanent idea that permeates most of even post-Enlightenment thinking. The idea that we have an essential human nature. And Sartre says, no, we don't. We are who we are as individuals, and we define ourselves. We are not defined by somebody else. Because we have no creator, we have no one to define us. And actually what that does is that puts an enormous burden upon us to make our choices for ourselves, act freely, and accept the consequences of those things. So in that way, I suppose actually it diverges from Rick and Morty's perspective, or at least Rick's perspective.
Yeah,
where
Rick's a lot more nihilistic than Morty is. Although Morty's becoming a bit crazy these days. I'm enjoying watching that. What do you think's going to happen actually with Morty? Because I've seen theories that Morty, this happens to every Morty as such, and that they all sort of start to resent Rick, and that's why you had evil Morty in the first season, and that we're now seeing that transition towards him being completely resentful of all the Ricks.
Okay. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because he's like he's also starting to manipulate Rick.
Yeah, I thought that was the best bit about that whole whirly-dirly conspiracy episode, where it was it turned that the whole thing was that Rick had been sent by Morty to deal, just so that Morty could have a bit of time off. Yeah, a bit of time off, essentially.
But there's an essential power shift there, isn't there? There's very much this season that it hasn't really happened before. I think it's interesting that the Rick as well sees the bit that cares about Morty as something that he needs to purge. That's the toxic side of him, isn't it? In the recent episode, the caring personal side, and maybe he recognizes that it's a weakness because it's the way that Morty can kind of manipulate him.
Potentially, it's this season I think has been really interesting watching Rick be less infallible than he normally is.
Yeah.
Still like unbelievable and in so many ways in his just sheer genius. Just like the toxicity, like even the toxic Rick that creates the worldwide toxicity ray. Just brilliant. He's still, and then, he beats that villain the Vindicators were trying to attack whilst completely ruined, like blackout drunk, like, fair play, Rick, well done. And sets up that entire elaborate thing, and then fucks with Morty at the end. It's like, I love you, noob. So great. Like, for such a smart show, it throws in the most like childish and ridiculous jokes. I think it's like the absolute personification of Dan Harmon, really.
Yeah. I think there's actually, I have no statistical basis for this, but I think there's a correlation between how funny you find fart jokes and how smart you are. I for some reason the really immature humor works better in a smart show than it does in a stupid show.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of why South Park got written off as nothing but swearing and fart jokes at the start. Yeah. And then they made an entire like mini series within the show called Terrence and Phillip that were two Canadians that are just swearing and fart jokes. And that was just like a parody of what people thought they were within their own show. It's absolutely brilliant. But the two guys who write South Park are two of like the smartest guys that I think in television and in Hollywood and just like in sort of celebrity world in general, and they still to this day say that the things that crack them up most are fart jokes and Cartman, one of the characters, just fucking with this other kid who's just so innocent, Butters, that they just love the most childish aspects of it more than any of the really like philosophical and intelligent social commentary that they're trying to make. They still just prefer the fart jokes.
That's fantastic.
If you like to keep up to date on politics, you think your opinions are worth something, then why not sign up to YouGov, who pay you for every survey you take part in that's based on current events, culture, society, politics, everything that's going on in the world right now. You don't have to be right, you just have to have an opinion. And that's something that everyone seems to have these days. So if you want to, earn a little bit of extra money on the side while you're killing some time, or if you just want to be able to save some money up for something at the end of the year, at the end of the university term, or whatever, sign up to YouGov by following the link in the description and earn some money from your opinions. Yeah. Then, sort of moving on to Game of Thrones, actually.
Okay.
What do you think makes it so appealing to people? Like, it's really captured the imaginations of everyone anyone who watches it. I'm yet to see anyone who's watched beyond a couple of episodes and not been hooked.
Yeah.
Not like, and I've been trying to sort of grapple with what makes it so brilliant. And obviously, like, a lot of people have talked about the kind of throwing out of all fantasy tropes, all sort of expectations that you see normally see in a TV show or a movie or a book series that's set in the same way. But
yeah,
I kind of feel like it's something more than that. Like, the shows that are so popular, or I find that most of the shows that are the most popular and most real TV shows nowadays that have basis in this idea that it isn't just good versus bad, that there's nuance and in everything, and that people are so much more complex than just like the big villain in. So, for example, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, but Sauron is just this evil force. That's what he's there to be. And then there's the good guys, and the good guys fight the evil guys.
Yeah.
And Game of Thrones completely twists that and puts it in this way that I think people can understand more. In that, for example, if they're in work, their boss might be seen as their enemy. And he might be, or she might be an awful person, but there's very, very rarely going to be a case where people don't have some redeeming factors or something that you suddenly feel like, we don't get to see our boss's backstory, but, we get
an idea that they are human.
Yeah, and that's kind of expressed really well in Game of Thrones, and I think that's part of what makes it so appealing to people, and that's maybe part of what has been lost in this last season, in that we kind of have this more good versus evil, all the people we like are on the same side-ish. They've killed off everyone that could be like untrustworthy, like Littlefinger's gone. Like, the only person really left is Cersei that's going to turn on them, but then, it's kind of obvious it's not coming as a shock or something that's...
We should say spoilers for me.
Oh yeah, dear. I said I wasn't going to talk about spoilers, but we've gone too far now.
I think the White Walkers aren't evil. Evil requires some sort of malevolent intent, right? Mm. They're just a natural disaster. That are doing the thing that they do. They're just expanding. Just like, say, cancer isn't evil. It's just a horrendous form of suffering. I think an evil thing is something that is conscious.
So you don't think the White Walkers are conscious? Because, have you seen the whole Bran is the Night King theory?
Yeah. Oh, sure. No, yeah, I have seen that. By conscious, I mean had made a conscious decision to do something nasty, and I don't think the White Walkers are doing that. I think they seem to be much more instinctual. Instinctive. Sorry, no, I may be completely wrong. I don't know, but they are clearly just this brute force that the characters are now battling against. To go back to your original question, I think one of the things that probably is most appealing about Game of Thrones is the reality of death all of the time, and that echoes our lives. I mean, I could be dead tomorrow. I don't know, and any one of our friends or family, God, this is dark. Any one of our friends or family could die at any moment. You could get a call saying, X is dead. And that's horrific, but that's a fact of life. And the other fact being that we are going to die. It's just a matter of when, not if. And in most TV shows and books, fantasy books, there's no doubt that the central character is going to survive, at least till near the end. Whereas with this, there's no central character, because they just keep on killing them off. Now, I think that's one of the main issues with the later seasons, is they've just killed off too many. If they keep on killing everybody off, then they're going to end up with nobody left at the end.
Well, George R. R. Martin has said that the end is bittersweet.
Oh, really?
So, I think we've got a few more deaths to come.
Yeah.
I think, personally, I think Cersei's going to die. I think Jaime is probably going to die. I think Daenerys could very well die. We're going to lose. Well, obviously he's not as big. We're going to lose Beric Dondarrion.
Yeah.
One of the Hound and the Mountain are going to die. They're going to have that. Like, I really hope that the whole series is. Have you heard the Clegane Bowl theory? That it's all just coming towards, the entire series is building towards this showdown between the Mountain and the Hound. But that's the whole reason for everything.
It's the whole reason for everything.
Yeah, that everything is just leading towards this Hound versus the Mountain showdown. And I thought we were going to get it. I really did in the last episode of the season there. I was like, oh my God, they're together. It's going to happen. We're going to have Clegane Bowl. But they've put it on hold.
Yeah. I kind of hope that the White Walkers win. I may be the only person rooting for the White Walkers, but I think that would be an excellent ending. Everyone's dead. Just everyone is dead.
Yeah. I don't know, because so the White Walkers, I think there's more to them than we've heard or seen. Yeah, I think that there's going to be revelations in the last season that are going to explain a few more things for us. But the White Walkers were created by the Children of the Forest. I'm going really deep in lore here, but they were created by the Children of the Forest to fight against the First Men. So the White Walkers are more of a retaliatory force that were created to resist the advance of men into the north, into the lands of the Children of the Forest. That they were, whilst they've now lost control of the White Walkers, that's why they were created in the first place, and that they're simply fulfilling their obligation in defending the north from the tyranny of man, essentially.
And we often forget our own tyranny, don't we? That we're the most violent species ever. We're living in what's called the Anthropocene, aren't we?
Yeah.
Which is the great extinction event brought about by us. And you can track that throughout the Homo sapien migration. Whenever we arrive on new territory, all of the big animals immediately die. Like all of them. They just suddenly go extinct.
And they're the biggest threat.
Yeah, and also the biggest source of meat. So we want to annihilate threats and feed ourselves, and we expand. And we are properly dangerous. I mean, this is why John Gray and James Lovelock and others compare us to an infection or we're plague animals, and eventually we're going to do ourselves in. And obviously that's the obvious theory that everyone knows about Game of Thrones, that the White Walkers are climate change, and because they're a reaction to us. If we don't get our act together, they'll destroy us. But they won't destroy the world. The world will continue. And that's the point with climate change. It's a threat to Homo sapiens. It's not a threat to the planet Earth.
Yeah, I think people struggle to grasp that sometimes, is that we're not saying that the Earth is going to just be destroyed. The Earth as we know it, as the inhabitable, very stable environment that we've known for 12,000 years, could be destroyed. Yeah, I think is the main issue.
Well, destroyed and then reborn, just as the dinosaurs were destroyed, their habitable world was destroyed. The Earth just regenerates itself.
Yeah, well, there was a period in like hundreds of millions of years ago, whose name escapes me right now, but essentially they had rapid release of carbon dioxide and methane from like permafrost and from like earthquakes releasing like massive vats of it under the ocean, and that it just pumped thousands of tons, hundreds of thousands of tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And then the earth heated up a lot. You know, it was pretty similar to the level of increase we're seeing now, but except that was more natural causes than we're kind of triggering that level of runaway warming, and that now permafrost is melting. We're seeing things like that. You know, we're seeing like similar results to that level of warming, but the only difference is we're triggering it. But the thing I find interesting was that it took 100,000 years for all of those gases to be reabsorbed by the oceans and the earth.
Okay.
So, you know, it's like you said, the earth doesn't go away.
Yeah.
We just might, horrifyingly.
Yes. Yes.
If you want to be optimistic, we're a simulation, and that humanity has survived beyond that.
Yeah. The simulation argument. Nick Bostrom.
Yeah.
Thing. I find that profoundly disturbing.
It's both terrifying and slightly reassuring at the same time, because, like, yes, humanity survived. We got to the point where we could make this incredible simulation and technology.
Although we technically are not humanity.
Well, we're just.
So should we just start by, if we just run through what the argument actually is?
Yeah.
This is from memory. I read his article a while ago. It's either we wipe ourselves out, or we survive and are not interested in what he calls ancestor simulations, which is completely accurate computer-generated simulations of human history or variations of human history, or we survive and are interested in ancestor simulations and obviously have the tech to do it. So there's a 1 in 3 essentially that will create ancestor simulations, and if we do, we'll create thousands, if not millions or billions of them. And so, if that's the case, if that 1 in 3 is correct, then it's much more likely that we're in an ancestor simulation than that we're not.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk puts it that he's pretty convinced that as long as human progress continues, that we will do it, and that means that the chance that we aren't a simulation is like 1 in millions or billions.
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk puts it the chances quite differently to Bostrom.
Yeah. And different ways to interpret it.
Yeah, and I can see his reasoning. I think the thing that kind of comforts me. Sorry, I think the thing that comforts me a bit is Thomas Nagel argues that we know we don't perceive reality anyway, right? So if we assume we're not in a simulation, what we perceive around us is our mind simulation of what is around us. We don't perceive things directly. They're not there. The thing that we're touching, the thing that we're smelling, whatever, isn't the thing. It's our mind's interpretation of the thing. So we don't perceive reality anyway. But that doesn't mean that the thing we're perceiving is not reality. It's just that we have to redefine reality as the thing that we are perceiving. So if we are a simulation, we still have our lives, and we still perceive reality as we perceive it. This is our reality, whether it's a simulation or not. I am skeptical of Bostrom's argument, but I, as of yet, don't have particularly good reasons to be skeptical. It strikes me as an atheistic God, as I know other people have said. Because of course the thing we don't talk about is, if we create an ancestor simulation, why don't we also create an ancestor heaven? If these things are conscious, doesn't it seem kind to do that?
Maybe.
And I wonder whether that would be really nice, right? So there's there's temptations to believe it because it gives us hope. And that's why I'm skeptical. I haven't thought enough about it really, but that's why I'm a little bit skeptical.
Maybe that's the light that people are going towards when they die, or when they have their near-death experiences.
I've never heard of a more unreliable witness statement than that of someone who is almost dead. Yeah, that's the thing that a lot of people claim, isn't it? Well,
there's a lot of correlation between the experiences, but then maybe that's what people expect to see, and therefore their mind produces that.
Yeah, sure. Or there might be a chemical thing. Southampton University are doing a study where they put a thing on top of a shelf, an object, and then when the person died and came back, they asked them what thing was on top of the shelf. Probably not the most relevant question when you justify death, but they...
Okay, for the out-of-body experience idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't quite know what the results are for that. I'm not sure whether the study's actually finished. I think it is.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why I brought it up. Can't remember the results. Fairly certain.
Well, I'll see if I can find it, and I'll put it in the description if I can. Everyone can have a look.
Awesome. Sorry, I just gave you some more work to do. That's awful.
That's all right. No, I'm interested to see what the results are.
Well, on the subject of life after death, I think Camus puts it quite well. And he recognizes this isn't his original thought, but he says it's in the Myth of Sisyphus, I think. He says, we believe things either because we've seen them or someone else has seen them and come back and told us.
Yeah.
But no one's actually fully died and then come back. People have had near-death experiences. No one dies and then comes back and tells us.
Well, there's the one thing I would say is people who have had their heart stop and then their hearts restarted is probably the closest we can get to that.
But that's not death, is it? So medical death is just defined as the thing that we can't solve. So it used to be, we stopped breathing, then we solved that, then it's heart stop, then we solved that, now it's brain dead, and when we solve that, it'll be something else. Dead is essentially defined as the thing that we can't produce life out of again.
Well, I guess, up until the point where the heart is actually restarted, surely we're not sure if it's solvable. Because obviously some people, they can do CPR for hours and they'll not come back.
Yeah.
So in that state, are they both, while the CPR is being performed, are they both dead and alive?
No, I didn't say insoluble. What I mean is it's solvable if we can solve it.
Okay.
So yeah, when they're in a state that we might be able to rescue them from, then it's not insoluble. When they pass through that state into a state we can't rescue them from, then it is insoluble.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by death.
Okay.
And
was Jon Snow really dead?
I guess given my definition, no. Damn. Although I suppose we could amend it, couldn't we? We could say a natural event that could bring him back.
Yeah.
Whereas this is the fire god doing his miracles, which is breaking a miracle is defined as something, an act of a deity that breaks the laws of nature, and that's kind of what happened with Jon Snow, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the wounds he suffered were definitely sort of medically not solvable by, So.
No, there was a few too many stab wounds.
Yeah. Well, I'd never had the term until the mooch, but Jon Snow got front stabbed. But yeah, on that interesting note, I think we probably have gone on for quite a while. I could talk all day about philosophy, but thanks for coming on.
Well, it was great. It was great to be on. Thank you. I'm glad you like my YouTube videos.
Yeah, well, we'll put a link to the channel and everything down below, so you can a couple of ones that we talked about as well. So if people want to go for more specific, but yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Later in the week, we have interviews with Harry Fone of the UK Libertarian Party and with Scott and Matt from Progressive Politics Northern Ireland. So be sure to subscribe if you want to make sure you get that. Don't forget you can win that £500 Amazon voucher if you follow the link below, as well as going to Beer 52's website for that £10 off and to sign up for YouGov's paid surveys. Till next time.